So let's see if all the machinery will work this time. Perhaps some remote student can verify my sound. Great. So today I have the intention of making a hospital management and information system for you, but you will have to think a bit as well. I will present that piece of information that I have on regarding hospitals and admitting patients and all that. And if there is one or anyone out there who is working at a hospital or has been working at a hospital, I do apologize for mixing things up, but this is a system according to me. So my idea here was that after I have presented my sort of solution, which is not perhaps the most correct one, but it is a solution, you might agree and you might disagree, because the amount of information and the amount of user stories I'm given to is really minimal here. But after that, I am going to try to create a database in MySQL, create a few tables and a few foreign keys and all that stuff, and see what happens when you try to insert things when there is no foreign key to reference to, so to speak, or a primary key to reference to, and all that stuff. Is that okay? So this is just a pure example lecture today, and I don't know when we will be ready. Perhaps within an hour or so. Let's see what happens here. So the hospital management and information system. That's the general idea here, and I've been thinking about that, and if I would draw just a blueprint of that hospital when it comes to making appointments with a physician or a nurse, perhaps. At least from my point of view, I'm walking up to some kind of desk where I report myself, and whoever takes on my case give me a ticket or a number, and points me to a waiting room where I will sit down, and some examiner comes up and tells me to, well, walk me to this room and I will examine you and all that stuff. So the blueprint for it, just to make you think a bit, is that if this is so what I have here are a few rooms where a nurse can examine me and check on my blood pressure, for instance, and so on, or perhaps there's a doctor there who can help me. And also there's a corridor here. So, and also a waiting room. So this is me walking to that help desk and perhaps I've already booked an appointment, I already fixed that. I just sort of notify the help desk that, okay, I'm here. And that person tells me to go into the waiting room. And finally, someone comes to that waiting room and picks me up and makes whatever examination I need or so. So there are there's a person going on here. There's perhaps a waiting room. There's a room where I can be examined. There is a doctor or a nurse helping me out here. But when you start to think about this, there's a bit more to it. Perhaps I'm supposed to pay for this, so there will be a bill sent to me, and perhaps there's a piece of journal here. The examination result. There might be prescribed drugs involved. There might be a diagnosis, a treatment, and all that stuff. And those words, I'll try to print them down for you on the whiteboard here. And let's see what happens when we put these words into action and try to create an entity relationship schematic out of it, right? Is that okay? Sort of gives you an overview of things physically. So if you would try to write down a few words here, that's the first thing here. It's an examiner. That might be the nurse or the doctor. I mean, for some of these things, there might not be required to get a doctor. A nurse might suffice or something. There's a patient. Perhaps there's a prescribed drug involved here. A journal, there's a room, and an appointment. Employee. Some of these are probably the same thing, so perhaps the employee and the examiner is the same thing, or that's a type and that's an entity. We might end up with a lab result. So if I'm, as a nurse, requesting some lab analysis, that might be the result of it. Billing, and a diagnose. And I'm not entirely sure here, but out of a diagnose, there might be several treatments, and each treatment might contain several prescribed drugs. You might have a different view of this. That's fine. I'm not telling you that what I'm supposed or will present to you in a few minutes is the correct thing. That's just my view of how things works at a hospital, right? And these are just a few things here. So I want you to think about these words I've written on that whiteboard and see if you can figure out a diagram for it, an entity relationship diagram. And just once more, these are just a few words. You might end up with a lot more than this, right? And I haven't added any attributes here at all. And that's one of those things we have to discuss as well. So is there any question? Or are there any questions here? So I want you to think about that diagram for, let's say, 10 minutes or so. Is that okay? Or do you require 15 minutes? 10? 10 minutes. So at 13:40, I will present my view on that hospital and admitting patients. All right? Är det den eller? Right? Okay. So let's see. I think I've done a few versions of this by now, and I think it's because of me not entirely understanding the problem. I'm sort of out of context once again. So a few things here might be relations, and some of them might be entities, and I've changed them over time a few times. And some of these words are not in my diagram. For instance, the word journal, it sort of lost its way out of it. But I started using the patient as my first entity. Those attributes are supposed to have a circle around them. I think I might skip that circle in a while due to the neatness of the whiteboard to save space when I'm drawing things here. So just take care of and be careful of that. And that patient I put that relationship between the patient and the examiner and said that, okay, there's a date and time here. And there's also a room somewhere and also a billing amount. That might not be entirely correct, but that was my relation between that patient and the examiner. So a patient might have an appointment with several examiners, and an examiner might have appointments with several patients. Not necessarily at the same time, but they might have that relationship. And we shall have a look at that relationship later on when we turn that into a table, because that's when things get a bit more interesting. And the examiner, I put an employee ID on it. I had the examination as an entity and said that the examiner performs So an examination is performed by an examiner, but an examiner can perform many examinations. And when it comes to that examination, I set a patient story, which is the story the patient tells the examiner when he or she enters the room and tells them that, okay, I've broken a leg or something. Yep.
Isn't that should be in the journal instead?
Yeah, I skipped the entire journal thing. But if you would go for this in the real life, I suppose there would be a journal, and all or some of these things I'm talking about today would end up in that journal. But that will probably be in some of the later versions if you would sort of develop what we have here on the whiteboard. So this is an ongoing discussion between you as architects or developers and the customer. And this is one of those versions here. I also had the examination for a while as the relationship between the patient and the examiner once again. But I ended up doing it as a separate entity instead. It sort of felt better. This is the reason why you want to use a case 2 for the using the eraser that much. And also perhaps that I'm not entirely sure about that one either, if it should have a date or not. But I put the So I thought that, sorry, it should say lab result. So I thought that an examination might end up having many lab results ordered by someone, analysis, and a lab result can only be part of just one examination. It cannot be part of several different examinations. Right? And that lab result is sort of a date, a description, and I'm quite sure that there will be a lot more to it than that. Perhaps a type, which tells you the type of the lab result. So in real life this won't work at all, because you would have to print everything in that description, and I think that the examiner is not happy with that. I think that that person would like to have it a bit more ordered. And I'm not sure whether there is always just one diagnosis for things or there are several diagnoses. I assume that there might be several diagnoses coming out of an examination. Because if that's the case, I think I'm calling it result as well. Because if you have that diagnosed, then there might be several treatment results coming out of it, but that single treatment result can only belong to a diagnose. Right? And then you have that drug. I hope that's the correct word, ordination. Is there anyone who can tell me whether that is right or wrong? If I have a treatment, I might tell my patient that these are the drugs you're supposed to use. And there might be the same drug, but you are supposed to have more or less of it. So I hope the word ordination is correct here. So that's why I'm putting a date and an amount for it. So that's the amount of the drug, and that's the prescription date or something like that. That drug has an ID and a name. And that treatment result and a description. And the same goes for that diagnose. And that ID. Just putting a name here. And perhaps an H as well. So this way I thought that, okay, I am a patient, I have my appointment with my examiner, the examiner performs an examination, might require some analysis and a result from it, and there is a result coming out of this, the diagnosed result, which might require several different treatments, which one of them might be the use of drugs. And since there are different ways of using the same drug, I'm thinking of the amount of it and how much or how often. I thought that, okay, that's the relationship between the treatment and the drug. That's how much. I'm quite sure if we would have to think about this or would have a bit more time, the entire diagram would look very different. First of all, I think that if you're having a look at that room, I think there would be a need for a booking module here so that you don't book the same room as anyone else or someone else. But I sort of took that problem away and said, okay, there's a room we need to go to for this appointment. Is this something that you sort of can see what I'm thinking of here? some of you are nodding. That's good. As long as you're not throwing things at me, I'm quite satisfied, right?
Is it necessary to have the undergoes relationship between patient and examination?
Well, yeah. The question is whether we need that undergoes relationship here between patient and examination. I think that if we perhaps turn that into a relationship instead, we might get rid of things a bit more here. My way of thinking here is that I'm a bit ahead here. So there might be a problem if if we are supposed to use that examination, how do we know sort of exactly that examination is set for that patient? That was my thinking when I was looking at that diagram, which might be a good way or a bad way of thinking of this. And this is a minimal. This is a minimal database schema, or at least a diagram describing the relations and the entities. Is there anything in here that you feel, okay, that must be wrong? Yeah.
It's just about like treatment. That maybe these are just details, but like treatment doesn't always have to be like ordination of drugs. It could be like exercise. It could be surgery and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Maybe like treatment should be an own entity or something like that. You only have like the result of the actual treatment, or
Yeah.
that is just
Yeah. I was when I was doing this, I was sort of. I wasn't sure I would use the word result here, because there might be someone can sort of tell you that, okay, this is a standard treatment, use it. But for me, this was more a description for just that patient here. So perhaps there would be I think that's what you mean here. There should be a treatment entity for those standard ways of fixing things. And that would be an added thing in that case to that standard treatment. Yeah, sure. And that might be the same thing with that diagnosis result. There might be standard diagnosis. And what we have here is just an addendum to that standard diagnosis. Anything more? Because if you sort of accept this as a diagram, we'll try to see what happens when we turn these the patient, the appointment relationship, the examiner entity, and the examination, and perhaps also the diagnose, when we try to turn these into schemas instead, or tables. So I think that by now you know that this is a discussion you have with your customer, try to figure things out, how they relate to each other, and that there are sometimes several working versions of the same thing. It solves the same thing but in different ways, and the problems that I'm usually facing is, when is it good enough? When is the solution good enough? And when you can say that that's the point, now I know that this solution is good enough, that's usually when I try to stop. because making and turn it into an excellent solution seldom pays off money-wise. So good enough is perhaps the point at which you stop things, right? Is that tough to hear when I tell you that good enough is the best thing? You all go for excellence. If your customer pays you money and you come to the conclusion that this is good enough, this will make things work, your customer is not willingly pay you for making the same thing and turning it into an excellent solution. Unless there are persons involved that might suffer from your solution, if they are getting hurt or something, then your good enough is probably way up there, right? So, but when you are doing stuff here, try to make them as good as you possibly can. This is the time to do that. So let's see if we can just make a few of these entities and relations and turn them into schemas. So I'm going to start off with that patient. And I'm moving over to the other notation. So that's the name of the schema, or that's supposed to be the older entity. And when I'm using an underline for an attribute, that means that it's the primary key or a part of it. So the primary key for the patient is it's that person's social security number. And it also has the two attributes name and age. So the question here is whether it sort of complies to the first normal form through BCNF, voice code. If you recall, the first one meant that it was supposed to have a primary key and that there were no repeating groups in here. If you had a look at the attributes. So I said that, okay, this one is okay. There are no repeating groups. Each attribute which is not part of the key is functionally dependent on the entire primary key, which is yes and yes. And there are also no transitive dependencies between the non-key attributes. And also the voice code normal form, which was the determinant thing here, which is already okay. So, okay, that's okay. And the examiner table did set the employee ID as its primary key, and I added name and title. And now you might argue that, okay, should this table be named examiner? Shouldn't it be employee? Oh yeah, if you want to. But if we have a look at it from a normal form perspective, I think it's good enough. There are no dependencies among the non-key attributes, and they are all depend on the employee ID. And there's that primary key. So I think we're okay here with that table examiner. So let's see what we have using the appointment schema. So I don't know if you remember, but when you have that relationship and it's a many-to-many, we took the primary keys from the entities and added those to the relation. So they formed the new primary key. So in that case, we have the social security number and the employee ID. And then we had the date time. And we had that room ID and the billing amount. So that's our new schema based on the patient and examiner entities. So let's see what happens with that schema here. What happens with that table? Let's see if we can figure out a way of making it work. So first of all, if I want to create a new appointment, I am using my social security number and the employee ID of my examiner. If those two attributes are composing the primary key, I think we're in trouble here, because if the same person visits the same examiner, we are violating that primary key. So by just creating a perhaps 5. So the next time we're visiting and we are appointed to the same examiner, okay, that's the point where we're in trouble. So we don't have a valid primary key here. So we are actually not following the first normal form, which was having a good primary key. So what happens if we add that to the primary key? Yep.
I mean, it works if you don't have several appointments at the same day.
Yep. And if you are removing those appointments from that schema, it will work. But if you keep that table intact and never remove a single row, you might be in trouble. So if I'm adding that attribute to the set of or to the primary key, we're good enough here. So I can meet the same examiner but at a different date, but not the same day, unless we're adding the time, which is the hour and minutes. then we're okay, which is quite common to do that. So you're adding year, month, day, hour, and minute. Then you're good to go.
And in general, it's bad practice to add like an artificial key?
Well, no, it's not. I'm coming to that in a later table here because it turns into a bit of a problem. But I don't think that, okay, is that the minimal key we have? It's a primary key, those three. But is it the minimal key? Can we make it smaller and still make it work as a key? Well, if the appointment is set to use the primary key composed of social security number and the date time, is that good enough? Yeah. So and the billing amount. And as a side note, that would turn it into a foreign key because I am pointing at an employee, the examiner, which means that if I'm turning that attribute into a foreign key, that I cannot make an appointment without having an examiner, which might be a problem. Am I supposed to have an appointment without an examiner? Perhaps someone else designates you an examiner at a later point. So make that a question mark as well. Might be a bad thing to make it a foreign key. But I suppose that having it as a foreign key might be a good thing. So do we follow the rest of the normal forms here? Well, if we have a look at the second normal form, if we look at the employee ID, is that functionally dependent on the entire key? Yeah. And the room ID as well? Yeah. And perhaps also the billing amount. And having a look at the non-key attributes here, are there any functional dependencies between those three? Well, I think we can find if we want to, but if we don't, we're okay. Because if you would find a functional dependency between, let's say, billing amount and the room ID or the employee ID, that there might be such a dependency here, then you would have to create a new table, which means that, okay, that examiner is always having the same price for an examination, which might be good or not. So, but being slightly out of context, I'm saying that, okay, we are following the normal forms as we should here, right? And then you come to the examination. perhaps I should. So that is also a foreign key if you want to, and that one as well. So I have my security number and my date, and that's the primary key for the examination. I have my story, and I also know who my examiner is. So that's the one-to-many relationship here. So there can be only one examiner for an examination. If there would be a many-to-many relationship here, then we would have to add a new table. Well, okay, let's assume that, that's the one. It's okay, it follows the normal forms, which it might do here. I think it's good to go for the Boyce Codd normal form as well. And then we add the diagnose result. And this is when we turn into the attribute thing here, adding an artificial key. So if you have that diagnose result, which is the identity of it, and then we have a bit of a problem here. Sometimes when you want to refer to from the diagnosed result to the examination, you sort of, okay, I have to set both the SSN and the date here. But I don't think that many would do that, because I think that, okay, we have a bit of a problem here, so let's change that examination. And this would probably also violate some of the normal forms. But we are making an enhancement here. The patient story, and the examiner ID. Or perhaps, yeah. I think that some of you might do it that way, so it goes a bit faster. But that's an enhancement that you do, and you will write it down in some kind of documentation somewhere. And I think that you also will have to fix a few things in your SQL server so you don't add the same diagnosis result twice, because that's possible right now. And that is probably going to be yeah. Or if we said that, okay, an examination could actually end up having multiple diagnosis results, then it's okay. So that is what I think that many of you will do. But that is something that comes out of your discussion, making things better in your database. So let's see if we can sort of create that database using just a few tables here, using MySQL. Yeah?
Why don't you set a unique ID on the appointment as well?
Yeah.
Instead of sending.
Yeah, that's a possibility as well, making that appointment. And I think that is something that most people would actually do here. That would be a unique ID, an artificial ID. But that is a conscious decision that you make in that case. So, because you might, in that case, you will have to ensure that you don't have the same person at the same date once more or several times.
Date could be like you have a year in it as well, then it can't happen on the same
No,
day.
exactly. So it's a bit of a puzzle to make it work as you want. You have a look at your normal forms and make sure that they comply, and then you go the other way around, making this database work a bit better, a bit faster, makes you violate some of these normal forms sometimes. And the part of what I'm supposed to, or I'm going to show you, is actually a part of what I've been doing right here, and that is deciding your domain for each attribute. Should it be an integer, or is it a string, or is it a real number? Great. So this is MySQL workbench. It makes me do things a bit faster, and I'm supposed to create a new database. So I'm creating a new schema for it, and let's call it the hospital management and information system. And we end up with that new database, and we also have a set of new forks here, which one is named tables, and that's the thing I'm going to add here, a new table. And my first table is that patient. Because I have no is that? No, it's downgrading it to lowercase. That's the case. Yep. Is there anyone who can see what I am actually doing wrong here?
Can you pull down the white also? It's reflecting a bit.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. Is that better? So I'm adding in that new column, which we named Social Security Number. And the question is whether it's supposed to be an integer or if we are to set it as a string. If we are just using integers here, we're a bit easier off. But it's supposed to be a character, a string, and what should we have here? Was it 12 or is it 10?
12 or 10.
Yeah, let's use the and the h, which might be an integer. And let's see if we can use the social security number as our primary key. Should we allow using null values for our name or age? No, so we are not allowing null values. And that thing there is so, let's remove it. I don't want it to be there. Delete selected, thank you. As you can see, I am not used to using MySQL. I'm a Microsoft guy. So we have our table here, and we have our columns. And let's see if we can add another one. which is the examiner. The examiner ID was the employee ID, so let's use an integer for that. Yeah. And I think that we shouldn't allow null values for that one. So, and let's see if we can make that appointment here. And we're supposed to use the social security number, which was an var character. I think we used 12. Is that correct?
I think 10.
Well, why should I be correct?
But why are you supposed to use the varchar? Like, since you already know that the person number is fixed length.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Let's change that. Let's change that. But yeah, good point. Why am I using variable character length here when I'm supposed to use exactly 10? That's a good point. Yep. Let's change that. And then we had the date time. And I hope I don't violate any naming conventions here. Examiner ID, which was an integer. We're not allowing null values, and we also have that room ID. Which I assume is an integer as well. And finally, the billing amount, which is a real number. And I am, well, let's see if we can use, let's assume that we allow null values on that one. So there might not be any billing here if there's a reason for it. Okay. Let's see if we can save that. And let's change that social security number into that varchar. Yep. And then we will have to oh, it flipped it for me. Why? Let's use, okay. Let me get back on why it reverts it back to varchar instead of n varchar.
Is it because of the encoding? You're using the n varchar?
Sorry?
You're trying to using n varchar because of the encoding issue?
Yeah.
Maybe it's already using Unicode?
Yeah, it might be. So I want it to be nchar. Thank you. And if I change that one, we have to change that one as well. So, but I think that we can add a social security number having less than 10 characters. What it does here is that it always occupies 10 characters in the database. So we would have to add a pattern for this somewhere. And some SQL servers support that. Let's see also if we can make a primary key here from our appointment to the patient table. And I'm really lacking space here. Isn't it strange when you tried this earlier, it worked like a charm. When you're supposed to show to other people, it doesn't work. I am trying to referencing. Is it because
It's a primary key.
oh, sorry about that. Is it because it's a primary key? I want to reference.
Try name.
No,
See if
no.
it works.
Yeah.
Maybe there is some restrictions. Maybe.
Yeah.
It's set to the primary key in appointment as well, right?
Let's see if I'm usually confused by this, so let's refresh them all. And I think that refresh refresh thing here makes things worse sometimes. That's it, thank you. And let's make another one. To our examiner. So, okay. So we have, after a while here, made two foreign keys. In the appointment table, from the social security number to our patient table, and from our examiner ID in the appointment table to the examiner table. So let's see if we can add and let's add an so we have a patient having the social security number 1, and we also have an examiner having the examiner ID of 1 as well. But that's a different thing. That's not the same ID. They are in different. There are two different attributes here. So let's see if we can add and I hope they use the same thing as in Microsoft's SQL Server. Is it 5 today? 6 perhaps? Did I miss? Perhaps it's the date. Let's skip those. Oh, thank you. Okay. So let's see if we can add. We can add the same same thing here, the same row once more. It should fail because of the primary key. It's a duplicate entry, and that's because of the primary key. So if we change that into a different date, let's say 13 o'clock instead, then we're good. But if we try to add just another one, and let's assume the same date here, and then we add an examiner ID that doesn't exist, because we just added one that had the ID of 1. So this should fail.
The date is wrong.
And the date might be yeah, a Vulcan date perhaps. So hopefully this will fail because of the foreign key instead. We are referencing an examiner that doesn't exist. So we have to go back and change it, or we go to the examiner and add one named Erica, and hopefully that insert will work. So there you go. So if you don't have those foreign keys set, you as a programmer has a lot of responsibility to prevent people from adding those entries once again. And you can be quite sure if you are preventing it through your program, there will be someone going directly to this workbench and start adding them anyway, because it's a lot faster. So make sure you set your primary keys to the correct amount of attributes, and also set those foreign keys. So let's see if we can find any appointments in these. Is there any way you can refresh that thing here?
No, I think you can mention the star, select star.
Or perhaps yeah. But I wanted to delete them all.
Need a star.
Not when I'm using delete, I hope. Or? Ah, did you see that? Can you see that? That was quite a good thing here. It did prevent me from using delete. I had to go to the preference page and set it so that I can delete it without using a where statement here. Or perhaps that's what you were trying to tell me. Okay.
Star.
Uh, Yeah, that was my showcase here. That don't use that delete from appointment using a where clause, but it prevented me, so I have to go to the configuration page and probably untick that so I can do it. So that was good. That was nice. So, but okay. Any questions? I hope that I have shown you a few things here, and that there are a lot of solutions for things. Might not be having the correct solution here. You might have it. If you're convinced that it's good enough, turn it into a schema, create your table or your tables, create your primary keys and create your foreign keys, and then you're good to go. Okay. Thank you for today.